how many of you got into education for the money? Yeah, not very many people. I think what brings us into this industry is that we are called, for lack of a better word, to help people reach their potential. I know that I have a firm belief and a feeling that every single one of us and every single one of our kids has a spark inside them of creativity, of innovation, of divinity, of whatever you want to call it, and that we're on the planet to recognize what that spark is, to at least recognize that we have one, to fuel it, and to share it with the rest of the world. And part of our job in helping people recognize their potential is to help them recognize, fuel, and share that spark. When we talk about accessing potential, when we talk about student success, when we talk about multiple dimensions of student success, when we talk about multiple dimensions of readiness, we're really talking about those three things: recognizing, fueling, and sharing. But we use some different language. The recognition piece comes from our goals discussion, the world of work map that Joe talked about, and talking with kids early on about matching up that whole thing of what's inside me that I want to share with the goal of how I want to share it with the world, through my career, through my vocation, through my avocation. And matching that up and finding that comes in the context of fit. Comes in the context of creating the behaviors to make that jump from this is what I feel inside to this is what I'm going to share with the world. The fueling aspect of that is what we do in the academic achievement level. Making sense at all? Now, this sounds highfalutin and whatever, but I'm just an Iowa farm boy from a little town called Gravity, Iowa, just in the other side of the state. Went to Bedford High School, Taylor County, third county over on the bottom row from Nebraska. We always joke that if you take that whole row of counties from Iowa and give them to Missouri, you'll increase the average intelligence of both states. 47 people in my graduating class, 27 of us went to kindergarten together. It's family. You know, I considered coming down here to KU and being an aerospace engineer, but I don't have any depth perception and the ROTC scholarship didn't come through, so I went to Iowa State and was going to be an aerospace engineer because that was what I decided to do. That was my whole path through high school. That was the thing that was going to happen. And then I saw fraternity brothers that were doing graphic design projects, and I'd spent all my study halls in the art room. And then I went over to the design college, and there were pretty girls in the building. So I have a Bachelor of Fine Art in graphic design, and then came up through the advertising agency world and really got into the creative side of things, the right brain side of things, and then ended up in law school by a strange turn of fate. And my law practice was helping people start their businesses and do joint ventures and share what was inside them with the rest of the world through entrepreneurship. And a friend of mine that was at a marketing firm that I worked with before is now at ACT in the marketing leadership position, and said, will you come back to ACT and help us share the story of some of the things that we're doing? And I said, because my only experience was taking the ACT on prom day of my junior year, and I was really far more interested in Angie Moore than I was in the ACT. And I said, you know, I'm not that interested in left brain, analytical, traditional measurement of student success because I fully believe in whole brain thinking. And I fully believe that the academic behavior side of things are there. I fully believe in the creativity side of things that we don't necessarily measure in traditional assessments. How many of you are with me so far? Liking that? Okay. There's a book called A Whole New Mind by Dan Pink, and it's basically my parenting guide, and it's talking about the intuitive side of things and the creative leadership side of things, and not just the left brain pieces. And it's those pieces that are going to bring back a middle class. The ship has sailed overseas or into technology on a lot of the jobs that were middle class before, so what are we going to do about that? We are going to have to take a more multidimensional approach to education. And Steve explained that ACT was doing things like the Engage survey. And he explained that we were doing things to do this more multidimensional approach to things. And I said, okay, I can get behind that. I can buy that. And now that I understand how the benchmarks that Joe explained fit together and answer some questions on what is readiness on just the college readiness academic achievement line and taking a look at that and say, okay, that's a great foundation, but that's only one axis of a three-dimensional chart. Another axis is the behavioral side, which we've talked about with Engage, and the third axis is the goals side. We call it the ABGs. Academic achievement, behaviors, and goals. And when you meld all those things together, you start to get a feel for what's happening and where the company is going. What we're going to talk today about is the next generation of assessments that's going to bring a lot more variability, it's going to bring a lot more complexity, and it's going to bring a lot more actionability into the data that we provide for the clients that work with us. And we're going to talk through what's driving that. First is that we're driving through the needs of states and the needs of the districts and schools within them to support teaching and learning as well as accountability. Now, at the policy level discussions we have, we're really getting into the idea that education policy is economic development policy. They go hand in hand, they feed into each other. More departments of labor are sitting down with departments of education and saying, how can we work together to figure this stuff out? How can we make a difference in that? ACT historically has had a workforce division doing work keys and many of those things and partnering with industry and labor. And then the education side is focused on the academic achievement piece. Those silos are starting to come together a little bit more now, and we are having more integrated discussion, and that's driven by the policymakers at the state level of the clients that we're working with. The assessments that we do typically are thought of as summative, and in many cases people just think of the ACT. I tend to think of Angie Moore whenever I think of the ACT, and it's a good thing. She married somebody else. Anyway, the formative side of things is to give you actionable data as you're going along. The online delivery piece is something that we all know is coming. You guys have been doing online delivery for a long time. The Engage survey is an online deliverable aspect. Now remember that we as ACT have to serve the entire country. And there are many schools and many districts that still have a really hard time getting all their kids in front of a computer to do an assessment. And so there's some access and some fairness issues going on with that. But we're moving into it. The other piece of the technology, not only just for the fast reporting and those kind of things, is the ability to do innovative item types. And we're going to talk about that later today in just a few minutes. And on those innovative item types, I'll let you know that this is a very selective and exclusive sneak peek that you guys are getting. In fact, the elementary item samples that we'll show were just released to us yesterday at about 6:30 last night before it got on the plane. So this is stuff that's happening as we speak and as we're developing, and in the next few weeks we're field testing a lot of these item types, which is why we're not releasing a lot of samples of these, but you'll be able to see some of them today. To the people who are watching on videotape, these are not for general release, so the videotape will be keying in on me over here so that only the people in the audience will be able to see these. So if you have a photographic memory, you can start sketching real quick, but we'd appreciate not taking pictures and things like that. Of course, you won't be able to see it anyway. So the innovative item types coming into play. Enhanced scoring and reporting. Part of that comes just in speed and the mechanics of it, but part of it comes from the innovative item types themselves. When you start looking at the pedagogical theory, the assessment theory around innovative item types, and you start saying, okay, what's underneath this beyond that they're really cool, beyond that they're more engaging and people tend to pay attention to them more, is you start to see things and questions that exponentially increase the complexity of the testing experience. And all of that has to be figured out. For instance, if a student does not interact at all with the interactive item type and they still get the question right, did they guess, or did they have complete mastery, or is there a problem with the question that should have required them to have to interact with the tool? If they did interact with the tool, and they did that seemingly correct, because we should be able to track all of that, but they got the answer wrong, do they need to get partial credit? If they completely messed up the interaction on the item type and still happen to get it right, again, those things. So when you get into the psychometrics and the testing theory of innovative item types, the complexity goes through the roof. Complexity goes through the roof. We're going to talk here in a minute, but the approach that ACT is taking on this is that ACT Aspire, which is this next generation system, will be primarily delivered online, but we will have places where we have to deliver paper and pencil based optional assessments. So the question of how do you norm the interactive items that you can deliver on a computer-based test with a paper-based test relative to the standards of both ACT, Common Core, or anything else that's going on here. How do you norm that and make sure that the scale score that comes back from the interactive assessment on ACT Aspire is fair and the same as the score that comes back for a kid that had to take it paper-pencil? Complex questions, very complex questions, but necessary in the world as technology moves forward. When we get into the needs of, again, statewide adoptions, and just so you know, on the statewide adoption side of things, in the 2012 grad class report, we had 9 states that had 100% ACT tested in their states, plus Utah with 97 because of a pilot that's going on there. In the 2013 class, grad class, there will be a couple of more states that have come into that and a few more that have done pilots. In our region, just so you know, Nebraska is doing a pilot right now. North Dakota has statewide adoption. Montana has statewide adoption, ACT plus writing coming into play. They just finished the first year of that as a pilot, and it will go this spring. They'll do everybody. Wyoming does statewide adoption of ACT in the 11th grade, Plan in the 10th, Explore in the 9th, and they are starting to do a Compass for every 12th grader. It has been optional before for them to do work keys. Utah, again, is in the pilot, and hopefully will be getting legislative funding for a statewide adoption of ACT, Explore, and Plan. Of course, Illinois, Michigan, Kentucky. There's a big movement across the country of states deciding that, okay, we want in on statewide testing so that we can do apples to apples against the rest of the country so that we have everybody having access, so that we have the data that we need to make decisions as we take a look at those things. But like Joe said, it's too late for those kids that just sit in the 11th grade. So we are seeing more and more statewide adoption of both ACT and especially Explore in addition to Plan, so that we can get that statewide data point clear down at the 8th grade level so that we can make some decisions and really take a look at Explore as a formative assumption in the K-12 conversation as opposed to a summative assumption, a summative discussion of the K-8 curriculum. Okay? When we get into the needs that are going on here, we see that, and the data supports this, there's a report online that you can get called The Forgotten Middle, act.org/research, and you can dig through it. I think it came out in 2008 is the easiest way to find it. But the data says that ACT data show that fewer than 2 in 8 8th graders are on target to be ready for college level work by the time they graduate from high school, and that the level of academic achievement that students attain by 8th grade has a larger impact on their college and career readiness by the time they graduate from high school than anything that happens academically in high school. That's a pretty strong imperative to start taking a look at how we're doing in grades 3 through 7 and eventually down into the pre-K and K through 7 to just see where things are. Now, does that mean that everything is going to be straight linear. No. That means that we need to look at what range kids need to fall in, because we know that kids develop, especially at those young elementary areas, at different paces. But we need to have an accurate idea of where they are within the range and what that looks like. I mean, I have a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 7-year-old, and I remember when they were infants, we had those growth curves, you know? This is where they should be on that curve, going from day one and right where they were there all the way through to when, you know, they were school age. It's the same concept, and we're starting to take a look at that, and what ACT Aspire will do will be to, in the first release of this, in the first rollout, will put us all the way down into the 3rd grade space. There will be future rollouts. This is built to be a sustainable, long-term commitment of ACT and our key partners to support states, districts, and schools in a K-12 and beyond continuum on the academic achievement side of things, with integration of the academic behaviors and the discussions of goals, and working all of those into the picture. So how does that work, and how are we going to make it affordable and configurable? It's built from a modular point of view, so that schools, districts, states will be able to say, we only want these subject areas, we only want these grades, and we want these kind of reporting packages. All of that is being tested, all of the research is being done, clients are being asked what they need, and this is being developed on a, I guess, a multi-path approach, because there's item testing going on and norming, then there's the languaging of reports, the reporting needs, and all of those kind of things. So there's a lot of activity happening in order to make this stuff happen. One of the questions that comes up a lot is, why are we doing this, and when did we start, and what's really the motivation behind this? And ACT has been working toward this vision for years, going back at least to 2003, before all of the Common Core discussion started and before all of those things happened, to start with the standards and get the benchmarks in place. When the discussion of having common standards came up, the work that we had done to create those is at the foundation of that and was used as a template to build around. In 2010, we released the vision of what our next generation system would be, and we're still on pace for that, and now it has a name, ACT Aspire. So you can look at the materials that you have, and these were created just a few weeks, couple of months ago, and it was still next generation, and just in the past few weeks it has been branded Aspire. So don't get confused over that. Those are the way that the brand works. So ACT Aspire is now the name of that. I'm going to go, no, it's in the wrong order here. Okay, so again, the motivation here is that when we found out that when you test kids at the 11th grade, hey, that's a great place to start looking back, but it's too late for those kids. So you've got plan, that gives us an extra year to help those kids. Explore gives us an extra couple of years to help those kids. Let's get it all the way down. Let's get into the research and early monitoring. And one of the reports that you can find online again, too, is called Staying on Target. And the Staying on Target research will walk you through the differential of how students perform on benchmarks and in college and retention and all those different areas based on if they just took the ACT or if we had a plan and explore chart. And you will see that consistently early monitoring, early intervention, early discussions to say, Kevin, you're really not on pace to be academically ready to succeed at KU or at Iowa State as an aerospace engineer. Let's do something about that. Do you want to do something about that? Do you still want to be an engineer? We don't have to make that decision for them, but we have a duty, I think, morally, as educators, to have those conversations. Now we have a reason to do that. Now we have a way to do that, and now we have the data to support being able to take action and to motivate, which is one of the key non-cognitive aspects of things. The behavioral side of things is motivation. What does that mean? It means sitting down and say, do you still want to be an engineer? If you want to be an engineer and you're not on pace, what are you going to do it? And how can I help you? That's what this system is designed to do. Increase all of those things. And they'll show up in different language. They'll show up in different ways. But you will know what it takes, because you're a professional, to say, okay, when I get this data point and I talk to that student, how am I going to be able to help them? How am I going to be able to help them motivate? How am I going to be able to help them study? Do they really want to do that? Is that really a fit? Or is this the thing that's going to say, Kevin, you really shouldn't be a doctor, but a radiology tech might make a lot of sense for you? Because you don't want to take the chemistry class. You don't want to take whatever class. So let's have some real discussions about that. And it doesn't have to be judgmental. It just has to be informative. I was talking earlier that we talk about intervention, and I really don't like the early intervention word, because intervention to me is scary. I don't like to be intervened with. It's just one of the things I don't like. But when a coach would holler me over to the sidelines and say, Houchin, you just missed that block, here's how you do this, that, or that, that's an intervention. And yeah, it may be a little bit scary, but it's coaching. It's mentoring. It's leading. We use the term intervention, but think of it more as coaching, because really that's what it is. It's a two-way street. It's a two-way individual. So the data shows that students that are intervened with early take more college preparatory courses, especially if they're actually motivated to do the thing they want to do. It promotes that career planning that we're all trying to get involved with and help them take ownership. And it leads to better outcomes in high school and in college. So ACT knew that the window for this, with the technology advancing so quickly, with changes in interactive items, and all of those things happening so quickly, we are an assessment company. We are a data company. We are an educational content company, and getting these items created, doing those kind of different things. But we are not a technology delivery company. We're not an IT shop, so we needed help. And what we did was went out to a partner that we've worked with for a long time on different projects with Pearson, and basically say, can we partner together to create the next generation of assessments? Essentially, we'll bring the content and our experience in education, and they have experience in education, of course, too, and you help bring the delivery technology. And so we partnered up on that. So you'll see ACT Aspire powered by Pearson. So don't get confused on where that is at, on who's doing what. It's ACT Aspire. We are leading that conversation. They are powering the technology delivery side of things. As we look to the future, what we're really trying to do is take a really fresh look and an honest look at college and career readiness. A lot of times in the past, those words have been put together, but it seems like in many cases, and not just ACT, but it's like somebody wrote college readiness and then they went back through the report and did a search and replace, and whenever they said college, they added and career. And then went on to support all that logic with just the academic piece of things and not the workforce skills side of things. Now we know that those are converging because of the data that Randy showed earlier with the need of having some sort of post-secondary education involved to get a middle-class job being so prevalent. So there is some overlap, and they are converging conversations, but they aren't quite there yet. Some of the things that are converging around that, and I like to think of this as kind of the quantum physics of light and education, is that, say, pulling a piece of information out of a reading text is light. If you are a workforce or a labor force person, it manifests as a particle of saying, we are reading for information, we're pulling a key piece out of a technical manual. If you're on the education side, it manifests as a wave because we are now reading for meaning out of a piece of literature. but it's roughly the same task. How do those overlap? When are they right to overlap? How do we measure them? How do we use overlapping language? All of those things are coming together. They're not quite there yet, but they are overlapping. And so the work keys side of things is our assessment on things like applied math, reading for information. There's a listening skills assessment in there, and there's a whole bunch of different work keys assessments that go there. 3 of them, the applied math, reading for information, and I can't remember the third one, but it's another literacy piece, go together to form what's called the National Career Readiness Certificate. And in the states that are doing work keys at a nationwide or at a statewide level, the employers are seeing that certificate as kind of a de facto standard high school diploma, minimum high school diploma that the employers are doing. So they're saying that whether you came from this high school or this high school, if you have a National Career Readiness Certificate, then I know that you can do these things at a certain level, and those scores have been benchmarked to a lot of different job descriptions where ACT has worked with industry to map their needs to basically benchmark, like Joe was talking about, the benchmarks for a specific college to say, if you want in here, this is our benchmark, our minimum benchmark. We've worked on that in employer situations to say that if you want to be a titanium welder specialist in an aerospace factory, we need you to have these scores on the work keys assessment. And that piece is coming together. So a lot of that work is using the same language, using the same methodology, but being tailored to basically the end user, the college or the employer, to bring those things together. And we'll be working quite seriously over the next few years to really bring those points together as we move forward. So again, that's the Department of Labor, Department of Education working together, that's employers working with higher ed to bring that post-secondary discussion to a true post-secondary discussion, not just a college discussion. Okay? So when we look to that, we're integrating those readiness factors on both sides of that for K-12, integrating the Common Core standards and the college and career readiness standards, which Joe talked about a lot. The ACT Aspire system will be 100% consistent with Common Core, so that the states who have adopted Common Core and are looking for a sustainable system to move forward will have ACT Aspire as an option. We're focusing on the skills they need to excel in the 21st century, which part of that is being able to hunt for information. Part of that is being able to interact with computer simulations. Part of that is being able to just navigate this system. The leveraging of technology is a piece that's in there. And then finally, with all of this data, being able to deliver it to you so that you can have individualized coaching / intervention conversations with individual students, knowing what their goals are, knowing what their motivations are, to help those become effective in order to help them fuel that spark, help them achieve the academic goals that they want to achieve to hit the goals that they want to have as a citizen in the community. So ACT Aspire looks like this. The classroom and individual formative assessments will be grades 3 through 12. So a piece of the question that came from over here earlier about having items from the ACT to be able to add and look across the spectrum at to really still help those kids and to help the process going into that. While you won't have the ACT specific items and the ACT specific tests, the standards for the 11th and 12th grade classroom work there will be consistent with what we're testing on the ACT. So there should be at least that middle ground being bridged a little bit, but the ACT itself is still going to be the high stakes college admissions assessment. Those standards that you see in the poster, which are, the poster's fairly good size to begin with and fairly small type. When you expand those because right now they basically just go to 8th grade. When you expand those all the way down to 3rd grade, there isn't going to be a poster big enough or type font small enough to get all of those in place, but that's where the goal is coming into play, is so that those standards will still be longitudinal, still be linear and vertically articulated, but they'll go all the way down to the 3rd grade in the first release, and then we'll be moving on from that. What that's requiring is that we are going to be developing a new scale, a 3-digit scoring scale that'll allow us to get things down to the 3rd grade and all the way up through the 12th, and that'll be correlated to the 1 to 36 score on the ACT. The ACT itself will stay 1 to 36. Okay? The unique systems, one is that we're going to be first. Just remember that. Longitudinal system connects student performance from grades 3 to 12. Okay? The whole thing. That's the first release. Will be there. Included in that will be a formative tool for the schools that are familiar with our Quality Core program. And in the catalogs that you have there, there's a description of Quality Core. There is a formative item pool that teachers can access based on searching by our course standards, which are aligned with the Common Core standards. And if you are working a specific standard this week, you can literally just click or drag and drop and build an end-of-week formative quiz using multiple choice, constructed response, and other different variables to build that set based on these formative items. That kind of tool will still be accessible here for the teachers to say, okay, if I need to work on this standard this week, where am I going to find all those questions? How am I going to put that together? How is it going to be aligned? This will make it easy for them to just drag and drop that, pop it into an assessment for the end of the week, pop quiz if you want it, and bring that together, which is going to help us pinpoint the gaps between what we think we're teaching and what people are actually learning. The entire system is based on universal design concepts, which from an accommodations point of view, I was really excited to hear this, is that when you talk about universal design concepts, the whole philosophy of that is to create the items in a way that is accessible to the greatest number of people from the ground up, rather than trying to have to, like we do now, we kind of have to force the accommodation issue on the outside. We'll still have some of that, but the technology piece of that, you know, getting larger sized fonts on screen for visually impaired folks, and you know, getting some audio elements into the piece for hearing challenged people, or getting some of the different elements of accommodation in there are going to be built in from the ground up, and we're paying serious attention to that because we know that that is a critical factor for our states and for our districts and the schools that are involved in them, and the kids that need that help. I am a dyslexic ADD kid. When I said take your Ritalin, I wasn't joking, because I took mine. So these things come in and they affect all of our lives, and you know, I've personally experienced some of the pain that goes with this. I've passed 2 bar exams, and I'm sure I misspelled subpoena at least 6 different ways on both of those essay exams, but they still let me through, amazingly enough. So I told you about the creation of the 3-digit vertical scale for grades 3 through 10 that'll be linked then to the ACT scores, the 1 through 36. We talked on sustainability earlier. Our goal on this is that we know that after the first round and the first year or 2 of implementation on this kind of a system, we're going to have to refresh items. We know that as fast as the interactive item pool assessment, philosophy, theory, psychometrics, all of that is moving, we're going to have to learn from that and move and adjust and keep things updated. And we're committed to doing that because it's where we need to be to help kids reach their potential. So the standards reporting aligned with Common Core state standards and aligned with our readiness benchmarks and standards. And I like to call what we're doing with ACT Aspire Common Core Plus, because we are not abandoning, and in fact in the first release we're going to include the science elements, and we're going to include the reading/social studies elements, whereas the Common Core solutions are just coming out with math and English language arts. Okay? So, Common Core Plus. Finally, I just said that, so the reading and science will be there, and direct writing will be involved in all the different grade levels too. Multiple item types to better assess the student's skill range. So yes, there will be multiple choice questions on there. Sometimes a multiple choice question is a really good way of assessing mastery. Sometimes we can shake that up. Sometimes we need to be more engaging and let people get involved in there and get in there and tinker with stuff. And then the Spanish assessment for grades 3 to 6, and then Spanish support for 7 to 10. Okay. So the timeline is that in the next couple of weeks, and why we're being fairly secure on the item types is that, or on the item examples, is that we're field testing those in the next few weeks. And I think McPherson's going to be part of that, and maybe some of the others of you that are being part of that. And if you are, thank you, because that's a critical area. So field testing those items. Next spring, we'll be equating scoring and doing those different scales. See how those things are working. One of that whole norming of this item, which is interactive, versus this item, which is interactive, compared to each other is enough. But then you throw in the paper-based version and try and get all those scales to line up, and what's it take in terms of adjustment of difficulty of the form, and all of those things that ACT is really good at figuring out. Thank God they have people that are way smarter than me in psychometrics. I wouldn't want to be one of those, but I'm glad we have them, and more power to them. We'll just keep them in the basement and throw some coal down there to keep them warm and let them work, you know. But that stuff is what's happening, and then the rollout of ACT Aspire, the first version, will be in the spring of 2014. So that's coming very, very quickly. We have several state partnerships that are forming up around that already to do those at the state level. And one of the key questions that I asked to the leader of the division, Paul Weeks, who's now the Vice President of College and Career Readiness and is in charge of the ACT Aspire rollout and launch, is that will ACT Aspire be available for use at the district level or right down to the building level if a principal wants to use it without it having to be a State Department or a legislative issue? And the answer to that was a definitive yes. So we're cognizant of how all those things are doing. Now, the costing issues of that, we're doing the best we can to make this as competitive as we can because we know that that is an issue, but I don't have those numbers right now. We're still figuring out where that needs to come in and where that'll be. So, item samples, and this is where I asked the video to move over here a little bit. We've got a sample elementary item sample here. After the experiment, Maria recorded her results in this table. You know, the car numbers, the time to reach a finish line, and then the student is asked to move each car into the garage and show the order of the cars from the slowest to the fastest. And then the cars, from looking at the table, you have to match it to car 1 and drag car 1 to the appropriate garage. Drag car 2 to the appropriate garage, drag car 3 to the appropriate garage, drag car 4 to the appropriate garage. Okay? So this partial credit all over, potentially, in this one. I'm also interested to see, from a psychometric point of view and testing point of view, is what happens if you change the size of the cars, you know, and those kind of things that come into play. Or you change and have one of them be a different color, or any of those things. So you can see that the complexity, not just of the item design, but of what we're trying to test, what we're trying to read, you know, how complex we want to make that based on color cues or size cues, you know, how is all that going to play out? That's what's being tested right now, and that's what's going to continue to evolve. When I went out on Google and tried to say, okay, interactive item types, technology-enhanced items, and just try to read some of that research, you find out very quickly that there is no set best practice yet on this. The theory of how these items are being developed, what we're testing for, what's the best practice in testing, what's fair, what's not fair, all of that stuff is still being developed. So it's going to evolve. Again, making the approach to a sustainable system being very, 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 very important, because these complex issues take a lot of time, a lot of talent, and a lot of money to norm the items and the forms so that things will be fair and accurate. A second innovative item sample. Bonnie's asked this again, the table, asked each of her classmates to select one of 4 foods for class lunch. Table below shows the results, and it's basically a little survey. The number of students that chose enchiladas versus lasagna. Bonnie wants to show her results in a graph. Click on the graph below where the top of each bar should be. So can you take that data and make a chart from the data? Again, oodles of opportunity for partial credit. Not something that's going to take anybody too much time to do. I'll bet you could click there and you could probably drag and just pull the bar up as well. You know, those kind of interactive elements are going to be a piece of what's going on here. This is more into the science realm of things, where you start considering how liquids play together in different science formulas. And it's about grabbing a flask and add its contents to the beaker. 2 layers will form, a result will appear in the results box. You can repeat the process as many times as you want, try different combinations of liquid. Don't worry, you'll never run out of any kind of liquid. Pour 2 of the liquids into this beaker, and then the results box is there. When the 4 liquids were added to a granulated cylinder, 4 layers formed. Use the experiments to determine which layer represents which of the 4 liquids. And so you can interact with this, and then what is the property that differs among the liquids that determine the position of the liquids in the cylinder, which is put in the, is it density? You know, is it just color? I don't know. I haven't played with the program. So, but you do the experiment and figure that out. Now, one of the questions that came up earlier is it's going to take a little time to interact with this thing. And if this is a timed exam, how much time should we expect people to take? How many questions are going to come from this? How much inference are we going to take from this? And obviously, you can't do this pouring experiment on a paper pencil version at all. So how are we going to get to the standards that we're after here? What are we after? Are we after them to be able to recognize density as an issue? Is that what we're testing for? Or something else? And it says, write a few sentences explaining how you use the result to identify the liquid in each layer. Now, when I was going to Iowa State to be an aerospace engineer, I was petrified of anything that required me to write, because I can't spell. Getting these kind of things in there and working around things where this is a science question, which would have been right in my wheelhouse heading into college, but it requires me to write. Okay? Getting those kind of things in there, forcing that kind of assessment into the play is going to make a huge difference on knowing the multidimensional levels of readiness, even multidimensional just within the plane of academic achievement, and being multidisciplinary in a science question and taking a look at that. Another one. This one, you have a plunger, and it's a pressure problem. An apparatus you can use to study the factors that affect pressure of a gas. He said pressure of a gas. Oh, sorry. That's my inner Beavis and Butthead. But anyway, you get the plunger, and you're moving that around and doing that experiment. Then by changing the distance, what variable quantity of gas or other pressure are you ready to directly manipulate? Right now it's set up as a fill in the blank, but that could be a multiple choice. It could be any kind of way of getting around this, but you have to interact with the item up there. And if you're just putzing around with the item and you happen to get the question right, is that a guess or is it not? How did they interact with that? How long did it take them to play with the pressure tool to figure out what was going on? Did they click one answer and then change it 3 or 4 times as they experimented? All those kind of things are the complexities of these interactive items that are being tested. Finally, a fan shown and is rotating, and so you start looking at how those things happen. And it appears up. Justify that all are, this is a justification, justify that all these are of a possible time between flash values where the fan appears to be stopped. So you're not saying what's happening, you're saying why is that happening? Or you're making the argument as to why this could be happening, a testable hypothesis that's justified in the item. So these are the kind of items that we're talking about when we talk about these online assessments. These are the pieces of work that are going into building these new assessments from 3rd grade all the way through 12th grade. This is the type of information that we are looking forward to gathering in real time. This is the type of information that we will be having to sort through and dig through to say what's fair, what's accommodated, what is actionable, what's normed, and then how are you going to be able to use that information in your classroom in a multidisciplinary approach. You know, maybe the student knew everything on the science piece, but that little fill-in-the-blank essay question of justify this showed really poor language, punctuation, spelling, that we can help out with so that we really get a more holistic, multidimensional picture of where the student is on the continuum through college and career readiness. Aspire is geared to the K-12 space, first rollout 3 to 12 in all 4 of our core subject areas with all the formative stuff to help the teachers get this information into the class. That's the goal. I've shared the timeline. It's a very aggressive timeline when you consider all of those complexities that we just went through. How many of you ever really sat through and thought about the complexities of these technology-enhanced items? So a lot of hands go up. I mean, this is complex stuff, multivariable stuff. And boy, I'm glad that I'm not the one that has to figure all that stuff out, because there probably isn't enough Ritalin on the face of the planet to get me through those days. But I'm glad we have incredibly smart people doing that, and I'm glad we have incredibly smart and engaged and caring people like you to help take this data and get it into the place where we can help kids recognize that inside of them is something special, give them the fuel that they need to build that into something that they can then take out and share with the world. All right, I know you got places to go. So, questions? Back? The question is, how immediately will the assessment data be given to people? The answer, and I'm sorry that if this sounds in any way flippant, is that as soon as technologically and humanly possible. The balance point that is going on there is that, especially in the constructed response items and the direct writing items, at what point can we trust artificial intelligence scoring versus at what point do we need humans involved in that? The more human is involved in that, like ACT plus writing right now, every writing essay goes out to 2 humans who have a rubric that score it, send it back. If it needs a tiebreaker, then it goes to a 3rd, and that takes time and that takes money. So that's the balance point that's being tested. We don't know right now from a reporting point of view of whether that will be all at once, where we wait till everything's ready, or can we give you some immediate factors right off the bat? Where does it become confusing to say, okay, here's this piece and here's that piece? How does that all work? And where are the balance points between time, accuracy, and understandability? And that's what we're working through in this process. So stay tuned for more answers on that. It will probably be something like, it depends, and that's what we're trying to work through. Another question? Great question, though. Will the test be adaptive in that, to answer the question, it's easier or harder to get your predicted score more accurate? The question is, will these be adaptive? In the first version, the answer right now is leaning towards a no. And there are some complexities in that You know, we've already got plenty of complex variables going on this element of things. There's also some complexities in the policy level work here because there's sometimes conflicting views as to whether adaptive is required versus non-adaptive. And when you start thinking about, you know, it's fairly easy to do an adaptive assessment when all you're doing is multiple choice. And you can gauge those up and gauge those down. Those are fairly easy to norm. But when you start working on these kind of complex technology-enhanced innovative items, that adaptive piece of things becomes even more complex, and who knows in 5 years if adaptive is even going to be an issue. We may get everything we need from this. So the short answer right now is that in the first version, these are not being designed to be what we would currently call computer adaptive assessments.
One thing I just want to quickly add to that, ACT does have experience with computer adaptive assessments if you're familiar with our Compass exam. So know that we do have that experience, but Kevin's answer was yes, at the present time, no, it's not planned for the first launch.
Okay, so for those that didn't maybe hear that, it's not that we're scared of adaptive. We've been doing adaptive in Compass for years. And so the justification of that is at a different issue than just can you do adaptive. Of course, we could do adaptive. We're choosing not to in this first iteration.
This is to both of you. Joe, a lot of your conversation was talking about the 1 through 36 scale, and I suspect many people in here understand that. But I also know that many people who are on the visit the summits also know that this discussion is going to go beyond just the high school building, the grade school building. It's going to go to the school board, it's going to go to the state board, it's even going to go to the legislature. This is a big sea change right now. In the state report, you've got a great page that shows how those scores, 1 through 36, are related to percentiles of tests. Does that chart show up at the district report so people can start building an understanding of what those scores mean, and then furthermore, why the scores are tough to move very much at the center when they expect, when people want big changes in your scores, but you really can't get big changes in your scores the way the scale is constructed. So the quick question is that chart in the district reports, or can they have to go to the state report to get that?
Let me make sure I understand. I'm short, is that what you're saying? Yes, I am. You asked initially about the score scale and how we've got the 1 to 36 for the ACT, and we're going to be adding the 3-digit score scale that will. Not worried about that. Mm-hmm.
But then as you get to the extremes of the scores, the bands start getting much narrower. And I don't think a lot of people understand how those scores relate. And they're comfortable saying, God, I get that 27, that's pretty good. But why didn't you get to 28? It was actually a big change.
I'm not sure that I can address that. That's more of a psychometrician answer, I guess.
Well, the question seems to me is, how do you move the bell curve? Yeah. And I guess the short answer is that whenever I have a parent come up to me and say, my kid got a 24, how do I get him up into the 27 range? I pull out the poster and I say, your son or daughter has shown mastery of these areas. They need to show mastery of this next level of areas. They have to learn the material. It's not just test prep. It's not just, knowing that they need to guess if they run out of time. It's knowing the material. And so when we look at this from a policy point of view, and we look at how are we going to move those numbers, how are we going to get more people over the benchmark numbers, we take a look at the items and the types right at the benchmark. and you look at those kids that are within 2% of making the benchmark, and you say, how can we get this information into the mastery levels of those kids? And that is a curriculum development question that you can choose to engage in or not, and you can choose to engage in. And this is why I love when you look at the state data and you say, okay, like in Kansas, you looked at that math data point for the Explore score, huge yellow band of kids that are within 2 points of being on target for benchmark. What are those different levels that are just right above the benchmark, and how do we get those infused into our curriculum, if at all humanly possible, to make sure that they're there? Now, some people say, well, that's teaching to the test. Well, when you're teaching to the standard that the test measures, that's probably a good thing. So that, the only way, and the bell curve, may shift over time. We see it moving a point or two. When we have a state do a statewide adoption, in the first year that they do the statewide adoption, their average numbers tank. A 5-point loss on the percentage of students meeting all 4 benchmarks is not unheard of. The thing is that over the next 5 or 6 years, most of those states line back up so that their 100% testing percentage of students making those benchmarks matches what it was before in the self-selecting. So the way we interpret that is that based on having that data, based on having an accurate assessment of 100% of the kids, pulling our head out of the sand relative to these standards and saying, what can we do to make these better? We need to teach to these standards. In what classes are we teaching to these standards? Is our Algebra 2 class actually teaching all of the standards that they should be teaching in Algebra 2 or not? And we move it that way. And it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes consciousness. I was talking to a curriculum developer in Cody, Wyoming a couple of weeks ago, and he said that we took our Explore data and we took the item points, and we found these 2 or 3 items that everybody was missing. And we got the faculty together on that, and we said, where's this being taught? And they all pointed to each other. I thought you were teaching it. I thought you were teaching it. Nobody was teaching it. So it wasn't something where the kids weren't able to learn it. Of course they're able to learn the stuff that we put in front of them. We just need to make sure that we're getting the appropriate materials in front of them that lead to these standards, that lead to the college readiness discussion. Now, remember that this conversation, and this is the lawyer in me, this conversation is framed around college readiness. This conversation is completely framed by the grades that freshman professors give in the freshman courses that correlate to what we test. Okay? There's a lot of power in there. We don't have a better way to frame that conversation yet, so we're stuck with that. So the freshman professors make the rules of this entire conversation by default because it's the grades they give that show up on the transcripts that get backward mapped to the ACT scores around the standards that we have all decided that we're going to use. So that's a long-winded answer to how you learn the bell curve, but it really comes down to teach the right stuff at the right time, and when the kids know the material, that's going to move. And we've seen it move at a statewide level. It doesn't move fast, it doesn't move in huge jumps, but it moves consistently over time when we integrate these standards into our curriculum. Great question. Thank you. Question in the back.
It's very clearly stated that the Aspire assessment is aligned to the Common Core state standards and ACT's benchmarks. And for math and language arts, obviously the Common Core is a very prominent and good thing to align to. My question really has to do with the science subtest. And I know you mentioned it's aligned to the ACT benchmarks, but there's also a project out there called from the National Research Council, their framework for next generation science. And from that, there's a set of standards being developed. Was there any attempt, or is there any attempt, as you develop items for the science subset, to align those items also with that next generation science initiative?
Okay, the question is, will our next generation science items be aligned with the national movements to create science standards? Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. And while Kevin Houchin doesn't have personal knowledge of sitting in on any of those meetings or been told that, I can only assume yes, because we've been at the table of all this, and right now we're, to our knowledge, the only ones creating this kind of vertical aligned system that includes science, so it would be a smart thing for us to do to be paying attention to that at least. And so trusting that there are very smart people leading this initiative, I would be very surprised if an answer yes to that question was inaccurate. Okay.
Will students still take the regular ACT as part of their college admissions?
The question is, will students still take the regular ACT as part of their college admissions? The answer to that is yes. The regular ACT will evolve over the next decade as well. And it would be silly of us to be sitting here thinking that in 10 years we will get everybody in a room with a number 2 pencil and a bubble sheet and say go. So how that adapts and as that adapts and how that's normed, and in the high stakes environment of the ACT and college admissions and financial aid and all those kind of things, it's going to be a very careful progression, but it will adapt. And it will still be a separate assessment because not everybody is going to have access to ACT Aspire. Question? Clear in the back over there?
Will this be accessible via the iPad? Will it be platform specific?
Okay, the question is on the technology delivery platforms. Will it be accessible on the iPad, etc.? Our intention is that we are building this to be as technology flexible as we possibly can. That means tablets. By definition, that will mean some iPad stuff, and working to that pace. We are not working yet to the phone level, but who knows how the definitions of the technology platforms are going to change in the next 2 or 3 years. And so this is part of the reason why we're partnering with Pearson on the technology side, is because you need a lot of serious horsepower on the technology side to keep up with all of the different platforms and all of those different changes to apps and releases and bug fixes and all of those kind of issues. And so this is, again, it's an aggressive timeline to get it rolled out. Will it roll out on an iPad? I can't answer that right now. Will we be using iPads in 2016? I can't answer that either. But great question.
My question is that currently the ACT, when we do analysis, this chart's magic, it's the ACT.
Love the poster, yeah.
It's inside, and so when we go online, we get a little deeper view. But that's all ACT-based curriculum and framework. And I understand that you're aligning to Common Core with Aspire, but the language we would get in the reporting, just like the language we get in ACT can kind of give us insight into this chart. The language we get in Aspire in reporting and feedback, is it going to be true? This is not exactly Common Core language, which I understand it hasn't needed to be.
Right.
I don't expect it to be in the future. But on Aspire, is it going to be ACT language that comes back in the reporting, or is it truly, because it's being scaled in a different way, going to be coming back with true Common Core language?
Right. The question is the languaging of the reporting. And are we going to be using ACT nomenclature? Are we going to be using Common Core nomenclature? Are we going to be using real people nomenclature? Just, yeah.
We pull up and it's framed different for that content in the Common Core.
Yeah.
Anything that I can see a relationship, a correlation, but it is clearly, this is ACT.
Right. And to answer that question, all I can say is that those conversations are happening. Those questions are being asked, and those potential answers are being tested. And we will be taking as much market feedback as we possibly can on that. We were in Iowa City earlier this week for an annual meeting, and one of the exercises that we did as a group of director level and everybody higher from the Educational Services Division was to have a conversation specifically around the languaging of achievement, of goals, and of behaviors, and how does that need to be presented in reports. And so
we correlate our local curriculum to this.
Yeah.
We sit around and say, we have curriculum that's going to allow us to answer these questions, but our local curriculum in this room, I think predominantly will be written for Common Core. We're spending a lot of time, energy, and resources, and that's what our teachers are going to know.
Absolutely, and right now, as of May, we learned that we are currently changing the language of our current college readiness standards to reflect Common Core language as to not confuse the education community that's looking at both of them. So we're walking down that road right now to change our current college readiness standards to that language, and the new one, I would assume that will be lined up with it. Yes?
So when would this switch occur, that language switch?
I don't have a date on that. Her question was, when is the language going to change on that? And they didn't release a date to us just yet. They said they're doing it.
That'll be a big fat hairy deal because we need to go back and kind of realign in some ways some of our courses that are not really in the Common Core right now.
Right, and she's talking about, well, we have our curriculum review worksheets. Are you using those to try to match? Right, understood. Yes, ma'am, you have a question?
I have two quick ones. I was wondering about the percentage of your innovative items versus the multiple choice, and also if you have a timeline for the electronic drill down reporting that you referenced for the export.
Okay. Her questions were the percentage of the innovative item types for Aspire versus multiple choice. And then the other question was a timeline on our online reporting tool. So I'll start with the online reporting tool, and I'll hand it off to Kevin for the other. A year plus ago, you might have heard from ACT staff that we were hoping to introduce our College and Career Readiness Information System, which is the online reporting tool, last fall. Well, we moved mountains to try to get that to work. We brought Oracle onto our campus in Iowa City and decided we're going to make this work. And they got to the point of having it ready to release, and when they pumped all the data, the millions and millions of students' records into the program, the performance was not up to par to give to you all to use. It was just way too slow. So they've been using this past year trying to fine-tune that and get it ready. And right now, there are actually districts, and I think McPherson is one, that is piloting it right now to do performance tests. And can you speak to that, Randy? I don't know if they'll let you, but will they let you?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll let him answer how his experience has been, but just know that there are educators out right now that are piloting it, and then I don't have a date. I wish I did, but we're making progress. So let Randy answer that, and then we'll get back.
Just real quick, yeah, you can just drill down, you click on it, and then you get the students. The other question, though, is when you drill down, you can already see the Common Core standards that the student knows or doesn't know. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. When you get into that system, when you get into CCRIS, you can look at the Common Core standard and the ACT College Readiness Standard. So we are working to change our language, but the Common Core standards are already embedded into the reporting tool, which is coming.
Okay. And then on the percentage of interactive and or technology enhanced and or innovative, however you want to describe that, we don't have a specific percentage yet. That's part of the field testing to see how that all works. But please know that a technology enhanced item can result in a multiple choice question. So multiple choice question is not a separate subset on the Venn diagram from technology enhanced questions. Questions over here, okay.
If this is a timed test and you are going to address all of the standards, are we talking one testing session for reading, English, math, science, similar to ACT? Or are we talking multiple testing sessions? How many items, how long of testing will be involved?
The question is one of timing and, test endurance, so to speak, and all those pieces. Of course, when we're talking formative, those will be happening in iterative sessions along the way. Summative will probably be happening at the course level. So again, they will be blocked into different areas and different grades. So the piece of that is still being tested, and when you're talking about a timed test, how long does it take to interact with a problem and answer 6 questions based on that interaction versus one multiple choice problem that was just a short situation like Joe showed earlier. And so
there are 26 or 28 standards for math at 5th grade. And I assume that you're going to have multiple questions for each standard.
Well, not what you're getting into the testing theory and psychometric side of things that I can't answer to right now.
This is going to replace Common Core. Our assumption is each of the Common Core standards are going to be tested. If it's not
And it's too early for me to answer that right now.
And you have no idea about how long the test would be?
I do not.
Single testing sessions, multiple testing?
Do not. We're testing that right now.
But you can confirm it's going to be timed?
The other thing is, will it be timed? I'm sure that there will be some timed versions of the assessment or different assessments. All those details are coming together very, very quickly, but we do not have the answers for those right now. The rollout is spring of 2014, and we're testing the individual items right now, and before you can put any of those kind of questions, of those kind of details together, you have to have an item pool that you can start working from and see how those things question, because those are great questions, they're critical questions. It's just too early in the process right now for us to be able to say it will be this way, because then you would be saying, well, why is it this way when you don't even know if that item is accurately getting to this piece, that piece, or the other piece. So there's a dance of this going on in terms of what the reporting needs to be, what the items need to be, what the testing format needs to be, what the accommodations need to be. There are a lot of moving parts in this thing, and so we're committed to getting it done. We're committed to having it in the field in the spring of 2014 from 3 all the way through 12, and being able to support that long term. As that moves forward, will it shift, will it change as we learn more? Probably. I think it'll need to. And then I'll come back to you. Great question. The great question is, what happens to Explore and Plan when Aspire comes out? The answer to that is that you can still use Explore and Plan. There will be a significant timeline of overlap when both of those things will be available. How long that'll be until maybe Explore and Plan become replaced with Aspire elements, don't know the answer to that yet either. But you can plan on Explore and Plan being available well past 2014.
Actually, I just got an update on that. Explore and Plan will remain unchanged, we're told, to the end of spring 2014. So that's where you can count on that part. After that, you can make some assumptions as to how it might be folded in to Aspire.
So I was wrong?
Well, into 2014, that's what I just heard.
Okay.
Explore and Plan. Yeah.
So Mike, the dilemma is this. We've got to make some assumptions at some point about some assessment that measures Common Core. And we're going to have to make some assumptions based on some field testing that's going to take place with Smarter Balance and ACT in the next few months. But we're not going to see the entire package till it actually rolls out. So the two task forces that are working on this are trying to work on a definition and an answer to that before anyone knows it. So it's a tough thing. It's just really tough. The other thing that these guys have said that I don't want to diminish is when we went on the tour of the state of Kansas, the vast majority of the things that you think need to be measured for college and career are not academic. They're behavioral. And I know this, that what's being developed by the two consortiums will measure English, language arts, and math. It's not made to measure that. So something else is going to have to measure that for us. They have a product, there are other products, but something's going to have to measure that if that's important for Kansas.
So are you saying that the Engage will be part of the Aspire package?
The question is, will Engage be part of the Aspire package? The answer to that is that Engage will remain a standalone piece, but that as many of those elements as we can possibly work into the assessment and make work back and forth will be rolled in somehow. And how that looks, again, we don't have the exact answer right now. We're looking at how do we get that Engage bank of questions and survey stuff into into Compass, because it's already an online assessment, and kind of how do we repackage some of these, because we're finding out that Engage is an incredibly powerful and needed tool in the marketplace. So how can we make that easier for people to put in place all around. And when we already have somebody doing an online, bank of questions that are non-cognitive in either the interest inventory or the sign-up, set of questions, where's the balance point of how we use that time and questions? Because we already ask a lot of questions on the student profile piece, and they all have value, but when the context of how we've set that up, of why you're spending the time filling this out, has only been because it's a few extra pieces of the name, rank, and serial number for your academic test, that languaging needs to change as well. And so, how this is all coming together is very much a languaging issue. It's a technology issue. It's a balance point of use of time versus the actionability of the data that comes out and what we need to have there. So we're very much paying attention to how to bring specifically the Engage pieces into Aspire, but Engage will remain as well, at least for the foreseeable future, a standalone product. There's a question over here first.
And that's my question. What you showed us is Aspire, all academic items. How will Aspire measure what Dr. Watson was talking about?
So the question was, how will Aspire measure the behavioral aspects of things? As of this point, I don't know exactly how that interacts.
So then how is this different than starter balance? What's the difference?
Well, even as a standalone, you could issue Engage as a standalone product, which we do now, which then gives you that yielded data along with the career interest. Either you use the Kansas pipeline or you use something like they have. So even if it's not integrated when it rolls out, you could use that product as a standalone to work with your academics.
So I'll jump back to the modular component of this, because actually the slide that was, okay. We got an updated slide of this just yesterday, and the one that I'd seen before had another stripe on the bottom that had behavioral, workforce, and career components. So that's something we're going to have to clear up, because that's what it has been planned all along, that those would be other modular components, and that stripe went all the way across from 3 up to 12. So it's my understanding that those components will be included as modular, and you can add them or take them out depending on what your needs are.
And part of this is also just simply a branding nomenclature, because when we talk about the full next generation of assessments, and you have the workforce piece in there, and you have the behavioral side of things on there, I believe what we're talking about here is really the ACT Aspire product line is more in line for you to understand in terms of deliverable around the academic achievement timeline. Just taking and integrating all of ACT's stuff from 3rd grade all the way through 12th in the first iteration, and taking a look at that. So whether Engage stands alone as a different brand and you can do it that way, or whether it gets bundled into this, is really part of a marketing branding decision that we will do and make as easy as possible, I hope, to understand, and to understand how that comes together as a suite of products. But just to understand that what we're here talking about today relative to the academic assessment piece of things under the ACT Aspire brand and name, and what is going to be included in that is primarily the academic line of things. Okay, question?
I just want to make sure I'm clear, because a very key component to me as an elementary person is the soft skills and the behavioral piece. And so I'm not hearing you say you are working on product development, backing those up, and on those questions.
Okay, this is if I understand your question correctly, right now Engage on the behavioral side is set up to be, we have an instrument that's 6th grade to 9th grade, and if I can infer your question, are we going to be taking that assessment back down to 3rd grade? Okay, so will those questions from Engage be embedded in Aspire or whatever back down into the 3rd grade? I don't have an answer on that right now. That's a great suggestion. I'm sure it's on the table someplace, but I can't answer yes or no definitively on that. There's a lot of unknowns yet. Right. 6th grade's too late to start looking at everything. But we used to think 10th grade was too late to start, so now we understand that we need to start looking at everything earlier, and how we're going to do all that, how it's going to be put together, with the complexity, with the timing, with the reporting, with the financial element of the affordability piece. How much of this can you all put together? How much of this needs to be in like a base package versus different things that can be added on? And those decisions are being made and positioned dynamically with the input that we're gathering from these kind of sessions.
Are we looking at ACT Aspire and incorporating that in as our state assessment, or an option that we can opt out of the state assessment and get into or take the ACT as opposed to?
There are two groups trying to find college and career ready. And right now, we will have to pick as a state an assessment that measures that. If we don't change anything of our strategic plan at the state level, we will give smarter balanced assessments in 2014-15 for accountability to the federal government. But we may do other things as it relates to the accreditation model. However, ACT, because they got in this game a little later than the development of those two, is now being considered as a possibility in lieu of smarter balance, and that's the discussion that's going on.
The game you just defined was the game of Kansas assessments.
Kansas assessments, right, I'm sorry, yes. The game of Kansas assessments. So that Tom's group on the KSB and KSSA task force are wrestling with that in terms of giving a recommendation. And what we've been trying to do at the regional meetings and today is give out information so that we can get feedback from the field as to where should we give a recommendation. And that's why we're here. So, but we'll have to have something new. There will have to be something new, and we have to make that decision. Rick wants it really quick. He told me in Garden City, as we said earlier, but we got to make that decision in the next couple of years for sure. Yes?
Follow up on her question. Do you have plans to make the Engage back down to 3rd grade?
The question was, do we have plans to get Engage back down to the 3rd grade? I don't know, but I will strongly suggest we do. It's a great idea. Oh, sorry.
A couple times you made reference to grades 3 through 12.
Right.
Can you explain to me the 9-12 component? Are you looking at or planning for there to be a 9th grade test, a 10th grade test, an 11th grade test, a 12th grade test? Earlier you also mentioned courses. So I'm confused. You said this is not incorporating Explorer Plan or ACT as we know it. This is a separate thing, correct?
Yes and no. Let's take a look up here. So at the 9 through 12, we will have end of course individual informative assessments involved here. Now,
We're talking about Kansas assessments, we're talking summit.
right.
Let's limit the answer to summit.
Okay. So we will have summative at 9th, summative at 10th. Those will probably look a lot like Explore and Plan. At the 11th grade and 12th grade level, we will not have a separate summative assessment for accountability purposes. That will be ACT. Other than the ACT, yes. Does that answer your question?
Probably most clearly of any of the answers.
At least I got one, my friend. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, I know you have plenty of things to do on a Friday, and thank you all for driving for as far as you drove and for taking the time and interest to see how this might help the state, help your kids.